Arthur Davenport was one of the richest men in the country, a titan of industry whose name was synonymous with power and ruthless efficiency. But no amount of money could fix the silence in his sprawling, marble-floored mansion. It was a silence that emanated from the heart of his home, from the small bedroom of his 6-year-old daughter, Lily. After firing 7 nannies in as many months, each one more credentialed and less effective than the last, his desperation was a palpable entity, a ghost that haunted the sterile hallways. They all said the same thing: Lily was a lost cause, locked away inside a fortress of severe nonverbal autism from which there was no escape. He was beginning to believe them. But then a woman named Alara Vance showed up for an interview. She was not like the others. She was a quiet, unassuming black woman with a profound sadness in her eyes that mirrored his own, a pain he recognized but couldn't name. She had no fancy degrees, only a decade of experience and a past she didn't speak of. He hired her out of sheer exhaustion. He would later realize it was the single most important decision of his life. Weeks later, deciding to return home earlier than his usual punishing schedule allowed, he walked through the grand foyer, the silence pressing in on him. But then he heard something that broke the stillness, a faint melodic humming. It was coming from Lily's playroom. He approached the door, his heart hammering against his ribs with a strange mix of hope and dread. Pushing it open a crack, the sight that greeted him completely froze him in place. It was a moment that would shatter everything he thought he knew about his daughter, his life, and the very nature of the silence he had come to accept as permanent. This single, unbelievable moment would change everything. Before we continue with this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like the video. Oh, and don't forget to comment below where you're watching us from. We love to know that. The Davenport mansion was less a home and more a museum of a life that had once been lived. Sunlight struggled to penetrate the heavy damask curtains, and every surface, from the polished mahogany of the grand staircase to the cold granite of the kitchen countertops, was buffed to a sterile, impersonal sheen. It was a house suffocating under the weight of grief, a mausoleum for Arthur's late wife, Amelia, and for the bright, bubbly daughter he remembered from before the silence fell. Alara Vance felt the chill of it the moment she stepped inside. It wasn't the air conditioning, it was the profound absence of warmth, of life. The housekeeper, a stern woman named Mrs. Gable, gave her a tour that felt more like an induction into a monastery. The rules were simple and absolute. Adhere to Lily's strict schedule. Administer her medication precisely as prescribed by Dr. Alistair Finch. Do not deviate. Do not introduce new stimuli. The goal, Mrs. Gable explained with grim finality, was management, not progress. Alara nodded, her expression placid, but inside, a quiet rebellion was already taking root. She had seen this before, well-meaning but misguided attempts to bubble-wrap a child, to sand down all the world's edges until nothing could possibly get in. But nothing could get out either. Her own past had taught her that silence was rarely empty. More often it was screaming. Her first meeting with Lily was in the playroom, a room that should have been a riot of color and creativity, but was instead a landscape of muted grays and beiges. Lily sat on the floor, rocking back and forth with a rhythmic, almost imperceptible motion. Her eyes were fixed on a point somewhere beyond the wall, beyond the room, beyond the world. In her small hands, she clutched a tiny, worn wooden horse, its paint chipped and its edges smoothed by years of anxious handling. The previous nannies, according to the thick file Arthur had provided, had tried everything from flashcards to behavioral therapy, their efforts meeting a wall of complete indifference. Lily did not respond, did not engage, did not even seem to register their presence. Alara did not try to engage. She simply entered the room and sat on the floor, a respectful distance away. She didn't speak. She didn't offer a toy. She just sat, breathing in the sterile air, and watched. She was a quiet observer, a student of unspoken languages. For the first hour, nothing happened. Lily rocked, Ilara sat. The silence was a heavy blanket. But Ilara noticed things the clinical reports had missed. She saw the way Lily's fingers tightened on the wooden horse when Mrs. Gable's sharp footsteps echoed in the hall. She saw the subtle shift in the rhythm of her rocking when a sliver of bright afternoon sun broke through the curtains and touched the floor near her feet. These were not the actions of a child who was completely disconnected. They were the responses of a child who was hyper-aware, a prisoner sending coded messages from a cell. The file stated that Lily had a severe aversion to touch and sound. Yet, Ilara saw her press the smooth, cool wood of the horse to her cheek, a clear act of seeking sensory input. The inciting incident, the spark that lit the fuse of Ilara's conviction, came on her third day. It was time for Lily's mid-morning medication, a small white pill that Mrs. Gable delivered with the solemnity of a sacrament. The file said it was to manage her agitation. Ilara was instructed to crush it and mix it into a small serving of applesauce. As she did, she watched Lily. The girl's rocking had become slightly more pronounced, her knuckles white where she gripped the horse. She wasn't agitated, she was anxious. She knew what was coming. Ilara brought the bowl to her, and Lily, for the first time, turned her head away. It was a small, almost imperceptible movement, but it was a clear and defiant no. Ilara's heart ached. She looked at the medicated applesauce, then back at the child. The notes from Dr. Finch were clear. The medication was non-negotiable. It was the cornerstone of Lily's care. But Ilara's intuition, an instinct honed by a loss so profound it had reshaped her soul, screamed that the medicine was not a treatment. It was a chemical cage. In that moment, she made a choice. With her back to the security camera she knew was mounted in the corner of the room, she palmed the small bowl, walked to the attached private bathroom, and flushed the contents down the toilet. She returned with the empty bowl and set it on the tray. To anyone watching, it would appear Lily had taken her dose. Lily, who had been watching her with an unnerving stillness, blinked slowly. The frantic rhythm of her rocking subsided, just a fraction. It was enough. It was the first clue, the first crack in the official story. Something was terribly wrong in this house of silence, and Ilara knew with a certainty that settled deep in her bones that the diagnosis was a lie. The days that followed became a series of quiet experiments, a clandestine operation conducted in the hushed tones of the Davenport mansion. Ilara knew she was under constant surveillance, not just by the cameras that dotted the ceilings like malevolent eyes, but by the ever-watchful Mrs. Gable, a woman whose loyalty to Arthur Davenport and Dr. Finch was absolute. Ilara's every move had to be subtle, her methods cloaked in the guise of routine care. Her first hypothesis was simple. Lily wasn't being managed. She was being sedated. The small white pill, supposedly for agitation, seemed to be the source of the profound lethargy that kept her locked in her own world. By covertly disposing of the morning dose, Ilara began to see small but significant changes. The fog in Lily's eyes seemed to thin just a little. Her periods of rocking became shorter, punctuated by long stretches of stillness, where her gaze would follow a dust mote dancing in a sunbeam or the slow crawl of a spider on the window pane. Ilara began to test her new theory. If Lily was not disconnected, but overstimulated and sedated, then the key was not to bombard her with flashcards and commands, but to offer gentle, controlled sensory invitations. She started with sound. The official file claimed Lily was panicked by noise, yet Ilara remembered the humming she'd heard on her first day. It wasn't a vocalization. It was the low thrum of the mansion's massive air conditioning unit. Lily hadn't been agitated by it. She'd been drawn to it. One afternoon, while Lily sat on the floor with her wooden horse, Ilara sat at the grand piano in the adjacent music room, a space that was kept as a shrine to Arthur's late wife. She didn't play a song. She simply pressed a single key in the middle register, a soft, clear C note, and let it hang in the air until it faded into nothing. She waited a full minute, then pressed it again. From the playroom, the rhythmic rocking stopped. Ilara's breath caught in her throat. She pressed the key a third time. She heard a tiny shuffle on the rug. Peeking around the doorframe, she saw Lily had turned her entire body to face the direction of the sound, her head cocked in a gesture of pure, unadulterated curiosity. Next, she moved to touch. The file was filled with notes about Lily's violent reactions to physical contact. Ilara suspected it wasn't touch itself, but the unexpected, invasive nature of it. She found a box of Amelia's old things in a storage closet, filled with silks, velvets, and soft cashmere scarves. She laid them out on the floor, creating a small island of textures. She didn't guide Lily to it. She simply sat beside it, running her own fingers over a piece of deep blue velvet, enjoying the sensation for herself. For an entire day, Lily ignored the fabric island. But on the second day, as she moved across the room, she altered her path. Her small bare foot brushed against the edge of a silk scarf. She froze, her body tensing. Ilara held her breath, expecting a retreat. Instead, Lily slowly, tentatively, curled her toes into the cool, smooth fabric. She stood there for nearly 5 minutes, her foot resting on the scarf, her eyes closed. It was a silent communion, a secret shared between the child and the object. Her most significant experiment involved light and color. The playroom was deliberately muted, a sensory deprivation chamber designed by Dr. Finch. Ilara believed this was starving Lily's mind, not calming it. One rainy afternoon, when the mansion was particularly dark and Mrs. Gable was preoccupied with the household accounts, Ilara retrieved a small, powerful flashlight from utility drawer. In the dim playroom, she switched it on, creating a single, sharp circle of light on the pale gray wall. Lily's gaze, usually unfocused, snapped to the light immediately. She was mesmerized. Ilara slowly moved the beam, and Lily's eyes followed. She made it dance, jump, and skitter across the wall. Then she did something bold. She placed a set of colored gels taken from an old photography kit in front of the beam. The white circle became a brilliant ruby red. A soft gasp, the first vocal sound Ilara had ever heard from her, escaped Lily's lips. She shifted the gel. The circle turned a deep sapphire blue. Lily uncurled from her ball and crawled a few inches closer, her hands flat on the floor, her face a mask of wonder. Ilara spent the next hour painting the walls with light, and Lily followed every movement, her body alert, her mind clearly engaged. The wooden horse lay forgotten on the floor beside her. Ilara began documenting her findings in a small private journal, writing down each reaction, each tiny step forward. The discarded morning pill, the response to the single piano note, the exploration of the silk scarf, the fascination with the colored light. It was a collection of evidence, a secret testament to the child who existed beneath the thick blanket of diagnosis and medication. She knew the risk she was taking. If Arthur or Mrs. Gable discovered what she was doing, she would be fired instantly, dismissed as another failed nanny who had dared to defy the great Dr. Finch. But the ghost of her own past, the memory of a small hand she could no longer hold, pushed her forward. She had failed to protect one child from a silent threat. She would not fail another. She was piecing together a portrait of the real Lily, and she was beginning to realize that the girl wasn't just misunderstood. She was being systematically erased. The breakthrough came on a Tuesday, 2 weeks into Ilara's quiet revolution. It was a day like any other, gray and overcast, the mood of the mansion mirroring the sky. Ilara had forgone the morning pill as usual, and Lily was sitting on the floor in her playroom, not rocking, but carefully tracing the grain of the hardwood with her finger. The stillness in her was no longer a sign of vacancy, but of concentration. Ilara had been humming softly, a simple lullaby her own mother used to sing, a tune that had been a balm for her own grief. She wasn't humming for Lily, necessarily, but for herself, a small act of comfort in the oppressive silence. She was tidying the shelves, her back to the child, when the melody she was humming was answered. It was faint, barely audible, a single reedy note, slightly off-key but perfectly in time with her own. Ilara froze, her hand hovering over a stack of picture books. She dared not turn around, afraid any sudden movement would shatter the fragile moment. She held her breath and listened. The silence returned, thick and heavy. Had she imagined it? Was her own desperate hope playing tricks on her ears? She decided to risk it. She hummed the next phrase of the lullaby, her voice trembling just slightly. And there it was again. The same small, clear note, a perfect echo. Slowly, carefully, Ilara turned. Lily was looking directly at her. Not through her or past her, but at her. Her eyes, for the first time, were focused and present. Her lips were slightly parted, and as Ilara watched, she hummed the note a third time, a deliberate act of communication. A bridge of sound had just been built across an ocean of silence. Ilara felt tears welling in her eyes, hot and sudden. She sank to her knees, her heart feeling too large for her chest. "Yes, Lily," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Yes, that's it. That's beautiful." Lily did not smile, but the tension in her small body seemed to dissolve. She held out her hand, not to Ilara, but to the small wooden horse that was her constant companion. She picked it up, held it for a moment, and then did something that broke Ilara's heart wide open. She crawled the few feet that separated them and gently, deliberately, placed the worn toy into Ilara's outstretched hand. It was an offering, a transfer of trust. The wooden horse was Lily's anchor, her shield against a world that was too loud, too bright, too much. Giving it to Ilara was a gesture more profound than any spoken words. It was an acknowledgment of kinship, a declaration that she had found a safe harbor. Ilara closed her fingers around the smooth, familiar shape of the horse, the wood still warm from Lily's grasp. This was it. This was the undeniable proof. The child the world had written off was in there, waiting, listening, and fighting to be heard. The fragile hope that had been a tiny ember in Ilara's chest now roared into a protective fire. She now had a secret to keep and a child to save. Later that afternoon, emboldened by the morning's miracle, Ilara took another risk. She found a large sketch pad and a box of charcoal pencils in Amelia's old art studio. She brought them into the playroom and sat on the floor, making no attempt to engage Lily directly. She simply began to draw. She drew the room, the window, the rain streaking down the glass. Then she drew the little wooden horse, trying to capture its worn, loved texture. Lily watched from her corner, her gaze fixed on the movement of Ilara's hand. After a few minutes, Ilara slid the pad and a piece of charcoal across the floor, placing it near Lily without a word. She then went back to her own drawing. For a long time, Lily did nothing. Then, with painstaking slowness, she reached out and picked up the charcoal. Her grip was clumsy, but her intent was clear. She didn't draw a shape or an object. She just made a mark, a single dark sweeping line across the pristine white page. It was a raw, expressive gesture. It was a voice. Ilara looked from the humming to the shared toy to the mark on the page. These were not random occurrences. They were a pattern. They were language. Her suspicions were no longer just a gut feeling. They were a certainty, supported by evidence she herself had cultivated. The doctor was wrong, the diagnosis was wrong, and the medication, she now believed with chilling conviction, was not just misguided. It was a poison designed to keep the truth buried and the child silent. The confrontation Arthur Davenport had been avoiding for years finally arrived, not in a boardroom, but in his daughter's playroom. He had come home early, a rare occurrence driven by a gnawing unease he couldn't articulate. The silence of the mansion felt different lately, less like an absence and more like a held breath. As he approached the playroom, he didn't hear the humming that had so startled him before. Instead, he heard a soft, rhythmic scratching sound. He pushed the door open without knocking, his corporate instincts for control overriding parental decorum. The scene before him stopped him cold. Elara and Lily were on the floor, a massive sheet of paper spread between them. It was covered in dark, swirling charcoal lines. Lily held a piece of charcoal in her hand, her entire focus on the mark she was making on the page. But that wasn't what seized Arthur's attention. On the small table beside them sat Lily's afternoon glass of water, untouched. And next to it, the small crushed white pill, prescribed by Dr. Finch, lay in its little ceramic dish, unmixed, unadministered. A cold fury, sharp and sudden, washed over him. All the frustration, the grief, the helplessness of the past 2 years coalesced into a single point of rage directed at the woman who had dared to defy his explicit instructions. "What is the meaning of this?" His voice was low, dangerous, the same tone he used to dismantle executives who had failed him. Elara looked up, her expression not of fear, but of calm resolve. She slowly got to her feet, placing herself subtly between him and Lily. "Mr. Davenport, I can explain." "Explain?" he shot back, striding into the room. "You can explain why you are directly violating the protocol set by a medical professional? You are endangering my daughter." He gestured wildly at the charcoal-covered paper. "With this mess. Her medication is the only thing that keeps her stable." Lily, startled by her father's explosive entry and harsh tone, flinched violently. She dropped the charcoal and scrambled backwards, curling into a tight ball in the corner, her hands over her ears. The life that had been in her eyes moments before was extinguished, replaced by the familiar blankness of terror. Seeing his daughter's retreat, a sliver of doubt pierced Arthur's anger, but he pushed it away. He was in control. He had to be. "You're fired, Ms. Vance," he said, the words tasting like ash. "Pack your things. I'll have security escort you out." Elara didn't move. She held his gaze, her own eyes filled with a sorrowful fire. "You are making a mistake, sir. A terrible mistake. You see a mess. I see communication. You see a pill. I see a sedative that is keeping your daughter a prisoner in her own mind. For the last 2 weeks, I haven't given her the morning dose, and she—" "You what?" Arthur roared, taking a step toward her. He felt a dizzying loss of control. This woman had been systematically disobeying him, deceiving him for weeks. "You've been drugging my child without her medication?" "No," Elara said, her voice rising with passion. "I've been undrugging her, and she's been waking up. She hums, Mr. Davenport. She responds to music. She gave me her horse. Look at her." She pointed to Lily, still huddled in the corner. "She's not having a meltdown. She's afraid of you, of your anger." It was then that the impossible happened. Just as Arthur was about to call for Mrs. Gable to have this insubordinate woman physically removed, a small sound cut through the tension. "Da!" It was a whisper, a broken, fragile syllable, but it was unmistakable. Both Arthur and Elara froze, turning to stare at the small ball in the corner. Lily had lowered her hands from her ears. Her face was streaked with tears, her eyes wide with fear, and she was looking directly at her father. "Da," she said again, a little stronger this time. She uncurled one small hand and pointed a trembling finger at him. Arthur's world tilted on its axis. His daughter had not spoken a single intelligible word in over 2 years. The doctors, led by the eminent Dr. Finch, had assured him she never would. They had told him to grieve the daughter he had lost and accept the shell that remained. Yet here she was, speaking, saying his name, or a version of it. The fury drained out of him, replaced by a profound, heart-stopping shock that left him breathless. He looked from his terrified, speaking child to the calm, resolute Nanny. He saw the charcoal-covered paper not as a mess, but as a conversation he hadn't known how to read. He saw the untouched pill, not as a sign of negligence, but as a potential act of liberation. He sank into a nearby armchair, his legs suddenly unable to support him. The carefully constructed walls of his world, built on the foundations of expert opinions and clinical reports, had just been leveled by a single, whispered word. He looked at Alara, truly seeing her for the first time. He saw the deep well of empathy in her eyes, the quiet strength in her posture. She hadn't been defying him. She had been fighting for his daughter when he himself had given up. "Tell me," he said, his voice a hoarse whisper, stripped of all its earlier authority. "Tell me everything." A tentative alliance was forged in that moment, born from the rubble of a father's certainty and the undeniable proof of a child's voice. The silence had been broken, and now the real investigation could begin. The days following Lily's breakthrough transformed the sterile atmosphere of the Davenport mansion. The air, once thick with unspoken grief, now crackled with a new nervous energy, the energy of a hunt. Arthur, a man accustomed to leveraging his immense resources to conquer financial markets, now turned that formidable power inward, focusing it on the singular mystery of his daughter. His alliance with Alara was unspoken but absolute. He was the strategist with the keys to the kingdom. She was the intuitive guide who could read the cryptic map of Lily's world. Their investigation began in Arthur's home office, a room paneled in dark wood and lined with books he never read. He had his security team pull every frame of surveillance footage from the past 2 years, and he and Alara spent hours watching, fast-forwarding through the endless, monotonous days. But with Alara's guidance, Arthur began to see what he had previously missed. He saw the 7 previous nannies trying to force engagement, their frustration growing with each failed attempt. And he saw Lily, not as a vacant shell, but as a child actively resisting, turning inward to protect herself from the onslaught. Then they focused on the footage from Alara's tenure. They watched as she sat in silence, as she played the single piano note, as she laid out the textured fabrics. From the cold, objective view of the camera, Arthur saw the pattern Alara had described. He saw Lily's subtle shifts in posture, the way she would stop rocking to listen, the tiny, hesitant reach of her foot toward a piece of silk. It was all there, a secret history he had been blind to. "The medication," Alara said softly, pointing to the screen where Mrs. Gable could be seen delivering the morning pill. "Watch her. Every day, just before it arrives, her anxiety spikes. She holds the horse tighter. She starts to rock faster. She knows it's coming." Arthur leaned closer, his jaw tight. Alara was right. The pattern was undeniable. The medicine wasn't calming agitation, it was causing it. "I need her full medical file," Arthur declared, his voice hard. "Not the summary Dr. Finch sends over. Everything. Every test result, every nurse's note, every prescription order from the day she was born." A call to his lawyer, a man whose ruthlessness was legendary, set the wheels in motion. Within 24 hours, a courier delivered 3 thick binders to the mansion. That night, with Lily asleep upstairs, Arthur and Alara sat at the massive dining room table, the binders spread out before them like evidence in a capital case. For hours they sifted through a mountain of medical jargon and clinical data. At first, everything seemed in order. The initial diagnosis, made shortly after his wife Amelia's sudden death from an aneurysm, was backed by reports from multiple specialists, all recommended by Dr. Finch. The narrative was consistent. The trauma of losing her mother had triggered a latent, severe form of regressive autism. But Alara, unburdened by medical deference, noticed something else. She pointed to a series of nurses' notes from the first few weeks of Lily's supposed regression. One nurse had written, "Patient seems bright and responsive in the early mornings. but becomes lethargic and disoriented after 9 a.m. medication. Another note from a different nurse a week later read, "Observed patient stacking blocks with precision. This seems inconsistent with diagnostic profile. Dr. Finch advised this is likely an involuntary splinter skill and not a sign of cognitive engagement." "They saw it," Ilara whispered, her finger tracing the faded ink. "They saw what I saw." But he explained it away. Arthur felt a cold dread creeping up his spine. Alistair Finch had been his friend. He had been Amelia's doctor, the man who had delivered Lily, the trusted advisor, who had helped him navigate the dark days after his wife's death. The thought of betrayal was so monstrous it seemed impossible. Yet the evidence was mounting. The key artifact, the piece that changed everything, was discovered by Arthur near midnight. He was cross-referencing the prescriptions listed in the file with online pharmaceutical databases. The medication Lily was being given, haloperidol, was listed as an antipsychotic, primarily used for schizophrenia and, in extreme cases, for severe aggression in autistic patients. But the dosage prescribed for Lily, a small 6-year-old child, was alarmingly high, well within the adult range. A chilling side effect listed in the drug's profile was severe cognitive and motor impairment, mimicking symptoms of catatonia. "My God," Arthur breathed, pushing his chair back from the table. He wasn't managing her autism. He was inducing it. The room fell silent, the only sound the frantic beating of Arthur's heart. He looked at Ilara, her face pale in the lamplight. Her intuition had been right all along. They had stumbled upon something far more sinister than a misdiagnosis. This was a deliberate, systematic poisoning of his child, orchestrated by a man he had trusted with her life. He pulled out his phone, his hands shaking with rage, and called his head of security, a former intelligence officer named Marcus. "I need a full background and financial workup on Dr. Alistair Finch," Arthur said, his voice dangerously quiet. "I want to know everything. Every company he's associated with, every account he holds, every secret he has. Tear his life apart." The hunt had a target now. The enemy had a name. And Arthur Davenport would use the full weight of his fortune and influence to bring him down. The sterile mansion was no longer a tomb. It was a war room, the final piece of the puzzle, the one that exposed not just the method, but the motive, arrived 2 days later in a sealed dossier delivered by Marcus. Arthur and Ilara sat in his office, the heavy curtains drawn, as he broke the seal. The contents were devastating. Dr. Finch, a man who presented himself as a dedicated, moderately successful physician, was living a life far beyond his declared means. He had offshore accounts, a shell corporation registered in the Cayman Islands, and a portfolio of investments that suggested a secondary, much larger source of income. Marcus had traced the money. A series of complex, laundered transactions all led back to a single source, a discretionary trust fund established by Arthur's late wife, Amelia. Arthur's blood ran cold as he read the fine print of the trust document, a copy of which was included in the file. Amelia, a woman with a deep distrust of her husband's all-consuming corporate life, had set up the trust to ensure Lily's future. It was a vast sum, a significant portion of her own family's inheritance. And she had named Dr. Alistair Finch as the sole trustee, giving him complete control over the funds. There was, however, a critical stipulation. Dr. Finch's trusteeship and the substantial management fees that came with it was contingent upon one thing: Lily remaining medically incapacitated and unable to manage her own affairs upon reaching adulthood. If she were to recover or be deemed competent, control of the trust would revert to a different guardian, and Finch would be cut out completely. The motive was suddenly horrifically clear. It wasn't just about the fees. With control of the trust, Finch had been siphoning off millions for years, funding his lavish lifestyle while presenting a facade of humble service. To maintain his grip on the money, he needed Lily to remain a lost cause. Her illness was his golden goose. Her silence was the sound of his success. "He didn't just betray me," Arthur whispered, the words catching in his throat. "He betrayed Amelia. He used her love for her daughter to harm her." The enormity of the deception was staggering. Finch had positioned himself as the family's savior in their darkest hour, all while being the architect of their ongoing tragedy. He had preyed on Arthur's grief, his guilt, and his ignorance, manipulating him into becoming an unwitting accomplice in his own daughter's abuse. Alara placed a comforting hand on his arm. "What do we do now?" she asked, her voice steady. Arthur looked up from the documents, his eyes blazing with a cold, calculated fury she had not seen before. This was the man who crushed corporate rivals, who saw the world as a chessboard. The grieving father was gone, replaced by an avenging force. "We don't go to the police, not yet," he said, his mind already working through strategies. "He's a respected doctor. It would be my word, a nanny's word, against his. He would paint me as a grieving, unstable father and you as a manipulative employee. We need irrefutable physical proof. We need to catch him in the act." Their plan was simple and dangerous. They would replace Lily's medication with a placebo, a harmless sugar pill that looked identical. They would secretly film Dr. Finch during his next weekly house call, hoping to bait him into saying something incriminating. Arthur had Marcus install state-of-the-art micro cameras throughout the living room and playroom, invisible to the naked eye. Meanwhile, with Lily now completely off the sedative, her progress was astonishing. The fog had lifted entirely. She was speaking in short, hesitant phrases. "More light," she would say, pointing to the lamp. "Play song," she would request, leading Alara to the piano. She and Alara spent hours with the charcoal and paper, and Lily's drawings began to evolve from abstract lines into recognizable shapes. A house, a flower, her wooden horse. She was a child emerging from a long, dark cave, blinking in the sunlight. The day of Dr. Finch's scheduled visit arrived. The mansion was tense, every person playing a role. Arthur greeted the doctor with a practiced warmth that belied the rage simmering beneath his skin. Alara remained in the background, quiet and observant. "How has she been this week, Arthur?" Finch asked, his tone oozing false sympathy as he placed his leather bag on the coffee table. "Any changes?" "About the same, Alistair," Arthur lied, his voice steady. "Perhaps a little more withdrawn, actually. I'm worried the dosage isn't enough." It was the bait. Finch took it immediately. A flicker of something, not concern but calculation, passed through his eyes. "Patience, Arthur," he said, patting his arm condescendingly. "We mustn't rush things. The key is consistency. We need to keep her calm, keep her world small. It's the only way to manage her condition." He opened his bag to take out his stethoscope, and for a split second Arthur saw inside. Tucked into a side pocket was a small unmarked vial and a disposable syringe. It wasn't part of a standard doctor's kit. The central reveal was complete. They knew the what, the how, and the why. Now all they needed was to expose the monster hiding in plain sight. Dr. Finch, however, was no fool. He was a meticulous predator who had covered his tracks for years. He must have sensed the shift in the atmosphere of the house, the subtle change in Arthur's demeanor from grieving father to watchful adversary. He may have had his own sources, his own eyes and ears. The day after his visit, before Arthur could strategize his next move with the incriminating footage, Finch launched his preemptive strike. It was swift, brutal, and perfectly calculated to hit Arthur where he was most vulnerable. His trust in Alara and his fear of losing his daughter again. It happened in the late afternoon. Alara was in the kitchen with Lily, helping her use colorful beads to spell out her name. Lily was laughing, a sound that was still so new and precious it felt like a miracle every time. The doorbell rang, a sharp, insistent chime that echoed through the house. Mrs. Gable, her face unusually pale, came to the kitchen door. "Mr. Davenport, "The police are here," she announced, her voice trembling. "They have a warrant. They're here for Miss Vance." Chaos erupted. Two uniformed officers entered the kitchen, their presence an immediate violation of the safe space Ilara had created. A stern-faced detective in a trench coat followed them, holding up a document. "Ilara Vance?" he asked, his voice devoid of emotion. Ilara stood up slowly, instinctively moving to shield Lily with her body. "Yes? What is this about?" "You're under arrest on suspicion of felony theft and practicing medicine without a license," the detective stated flatly. He began to read her rights as one of the officers moved forward with handcuffs. Arthur came storming into the room, his face a mask of disbelief and rage. "On what grounds? Who filed these charges?" "The complaint was filed by Dr. Alistair Finch," the detective replied, not looking at him. "He alleges Ms. Vance has been stealing valuable antiques from the residence. He also provided a sworn statement, supported by the previous housekeeper, that she has been withholding prescribed medication from a minor under her care, a serious offense." It was a brilliant, vicious move. Finch had used Mrs. Gable, a woman whose loyalty he had cultivated for years, to corroborate his story. He had twisted Ilara's greatest act of care, saving Lily from the sedatives, into a criminal act. The theft charge was the finishing touch, a classic tactic to destroy her credibility. While the officers handcuffed a stunned Ilara, another team began searching her room. It was a foregone conclusion. They found a small, valuable Fabergé egg, which Arthur recognized as one of his late wife's, planted expertly in Ilara's luggage. "This is a setup," Arthur yelled, his voice raw. "Dr. Finch is the criminal here. I have proof." "You can share that with the proper authorities, sir," the detective said dismissively. "Right now, she's coming with us." The most heart-wrenching part was Lily. As the officers led Ilara away, Lily's face crumpled. The light that had returned to her eyes vanished, snuffed out by a terror she couldn't comprehend. She let out a piercing shriek, a sound of pure agony and loss. "Ela!" she screamed, the name clear and desperate. "No, Ela!" She tried to run after her, but Arthur caught her, holding his sobbing, struggling daughter as she reached a small hand out towards the woman who had given her back her world. Ilara looked back one last time, her own eyes filled with tears, her expression a mixture of fear and a fierce, protective love for the child being torn from her. The arrest was a catastrophe. It not only removed Ilara, the key to Lily's continued progress, but it also completely discredited her as a witness. Finch had framed her perfectly. Any evidence she and Arthur had gathered would now be tainted, seen as the vengeful actions of a disgraced employee. With Ilara gone, a deep and immediate regression took hold of Lily. The silence returned to the mansion, but this time it was heavier, more desolate than before. Lily refused to eat. She refused to leave her room. She would not speak, would not draw, would not even touch her beloved wooden horse. She simply sat on her bed, staring at the wall, a living ghost. The progress they had made was erased in an instant. The crisis was absolute. Finch had not only retaliated, he had won. He had ripped the heart out of their small, healing family, plunging them back into a darkness deeper than before. Arthur was left alone, with a broken child, and a legal battle that now seemed impossible to win. The days following Ilara's arrest were the darkest Arthur had ever known, darker even than the period after Amelia's death. Then he had been numb with grief. Now he was paralyzed by a potent cocktail of fury and helplessness. He had spent his life believing that money and power could solve any problem, but they were useless against the legal fortress Finch had constructed and the profound silent despair that had reclaimed his daughter. He bailed Ilara out, of course, the cost laughably insignificant to him, but she was released under strict orders not to have any contact with Lily, the primary witness in the case against her. They met in the sterile office of his high-powered attorney, a man named Julian Croft, who laid out the grim reality. "Finch has played this perfectly, Arthur," Croft said, his steepled fingers masking a concerned expression. "He's a respected physician. You have a history of high staff turnover. He has a sworn affidavit from your longtime housekeeper. And frankly, the planted evidence is damning. They'll paint Ilara as a con artist who preyed on a grieving family, manipulating a vulnerable child for her own gain." "But we have the footage from his visit," Arthur insisted, slamming his fist on the polished table. "We have the financial records, the motive." "Motive is circumstantial," Croft countered calmly. "And the footage? He'll say you were baiting him, that he was simply placating a distraught father. He'll have a dozen medical experts line up to say that the medication and dosage were appropriate for Lily's severe condition. It's his word against a nanny he's successfully framed as a criminal. It's not enough." Ilara sat beside Arthur, her face a portrait of quiet dignity, though he could see the strain in her eyes. The fight seemed to have gone out of her, replaced by a deep, aching worry for Lily. "How is she?" she asked softly, her voice barely a whisper. Arthur's facade crumbled. "She's gone," he admitted, the words tearing at his throat. "She's back inside, Ilara. The silence, it's back. She won't look at me. She won't do anything. It's like you were never here." The weight of his failure pressed down on him. He had let this happen. He had allowed Finch to get close, to hurt his child, and now to tear away the only person who had been able to reach her. That night Arthur sat alone in his office, the damning files spread before him, the silent house a testament to his defeat. He felt a despair so profound he thought it might swallow him whole. He had all the weapons in the world, wealth, influence, the best lawyers, but he couldn't fire a single effective shot. He was fighting a ghost, a reputation, while the real enemy walked free. His gaze fell upon the charcoal drawings Ilara and Lily had made. He had gathered them from the playroom floor, unable to let the cleaning staff throw them away. They were a tangible record of Lily's brief, beautiful awakening. He looked at the swirling lines, the emerging shapes, the clumsy attempt at a flower. Ilara had called it their language. He had been so focused on gathering external evidence, financial records, video footage, that he had overlooked the most important evidence of all. The proof wasn't in a bank statement. It was in his daughter's mind. The only person who could truly testify against Dr. Finch was Lily herself. But how could a silent witness speak? A new resolve hardened within him. He was done playing Finch's game. He would have to learn Ilara's. He went to Lily's room. She was curled in her bed facing the wall, a small, still form in the dim light. He sat on the floor beside her bed, just as he had seen Ilara do. He didn't speak. He just sat there, sharing the silence with her. He did this for an hour, then another. Finally, he took out the large sketch pad and a piece of charcoal. He began to draw, just as he'd seen Ilara do. He drew the wooden horse. His artistic skill was non-existent. It was a clumsy, lopsided shape. But it was recognizable. He slid the drawing onto the bed beside her. She didn't move. He didn't give up. He drew the window. He drew the rain. He drew a stick figure of himself, and then one of Ilara, placing them side by side. For 2 days he followed this new routine. He would sit with her in silence, and he would draw. He brought her meals, which she left untouched. He talked to her softly, telling her about his day, telling her how much he missed her laugh. He told her Ilara was safe, that she loved her, and that she would be back soon. He was fighting for her, for them. On the third evening, as he was sketching a crude picture of the sun, he felt a slight shift in the bed. He glanced up. Lily had turned over. Her eyes were puffy and red, but they were open, and they were watching his hand. His heart leaped. He kept drawing, his hand shaking slightly. He finished the sun, and then drew a simple, smiling face next to it. He looked at Lily. She stared at the drawing for a long moment. Then, with a slow, deliberate movement that seemed to take all the strength she possessed, she reached out a small finger and touched the drawing of the smiling face. Arthur felt a surge of hope so powerful it almost brought him to his knees. She was still in there. Ilara had given them a language, and he would learn to speak it. He was no longer just gathering arms for a legal battle. He was fighting to win back his daughter's voice, because he knew, with a sudden blazing certainty, that her voice was the one weapon their enemy could never defeat. The final confrontation was not a dramatic courtroom showdown, but a quiet, carefully orchestrated meeting in the grand library of the Davenport mansion. Julian Croft had advised against it, calling it reckless, but Arthur knew it was their only chance. A formal legal proceeding would take months, years even, and would be fought on Finch's terms, in a world of medical jargon and legal maneuvering, where Lily's truth would be buried. He needed to end it now. He had Croft arrange the meeting under the guise of discussing a potential settlement for Ilara's wrongful termination claim, a flimsy pretext to get Finch into the room. Finch arrived looking smug and confident, the very picture of a wronged, benevolent physician. He sat opposite Arthur at the long library table, his lawyer by his side. Croft and a court stenographer were also present. Ilara was not there, a condition Finch had insisted upon. "Arthur, I'm glad we can handle this civilly," Finch began, his voice dripping with condescension. "I truly am sorry it came to this. The nanny was clearly a troubled individual. I hope you'll get Lily the consistent care she needs now." Arthur let him talk, his face an unreadable mask. He had spent the last week doing nothing but learning Lily's language. They had filled pages of the sketchpad. He had drawn pictures of people, places, and feelings. A smiling face for happy, a crying face for sad, a thundercloud for angry. Lily had begun to respond, pointing to the images to express herself. She had even made her own marks, her own drawings. The final piece of his plan was sitting in the adjoining room with a child psychologist he had hired, a woman who specialized in nonverbal communication. "Before we discuss any settlement, Alistair," Arthur said, his voice level, "there is one more witness I'd like you to hear from." Finch's lawyer immediately objected. "This is not a deposition. We agreed to an informal discussion." "Indulge me," Arthur said. His eyes locked on Finch. "I think you'll find her testimony illuminating." On Arthur's signal, the psychologist wheeled a large monitor into the library. On the screen was a live feed from the next room. Lily was sitting at a small table, a digital drawing tablet in front of her. She looked small and fragile, but there was a new alertness in her eyes. The psychologist sat beside her, out of frame. "Lily," Arthur's voice came through a speaker in her room, "can you show us who your doctor is?" On the tablet, a series of photographs appeared. Finch, Ilara, Arthur, and a few strangers. With a steady hand, Lily used the stylus to draw a neat circle around Dr. Finch's smiling face. A murmur went through the library. Finch shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "This is a circus, Arthur. You're exploiting your daughter's condition." "I'm letting her speak for the first time," Arthur retorted. "Lily," he continued, his voice softening, "can you show us what the doctor gave you?" The photos were replaced by a new set of images, a glass of water, an apple, a toy, and a small white pill. Lily's hand trembled as she moved the stylus. She didn't circle the pill. Instead, she drew a large, angry X over it. Then she selected a drawing of a crying face from a menu of icons and dragged it next to the crossed-out pill. Finch was now visibly sweating. "This proves nothing. It's a leading exercise." His voice trailed off as the next instruction came. "Lily, can you show us what Dr. Finch did?" This was the moment. Arthur held his breath. For a long moment, Lily did nothing. She stared at the blank screen, her small face tight with concentration. Then she began to draw. It wasn't a sophisticated drawing, but it was horrifyingly clear. She drew a stick figure of a man, and next to it, a stick figure of a little girl lying in a bed. The man was holding something small, a syringe, over a glass of juice next to the bed. She drew jagged, angry lines radiating from the girl's head, and then covered the entire drawing of the girl with dark, frantic scribbles, completely obscuring her until she was nothing but a black shape. A stunned silence fell over the library. The court stenographer's fingers had frozen over her keys. Finch's lawyer looked at his client, his face pale. The drawing was a child's raw, unambiguous testimony of being drugged, of being erased. It was more powerful than any sworn statement. "It's a fantasy," Finch stammered, his composure finally shattering. "She's a disturbed child. You've put these ideas in her head." But it was too late. As he was speaking, two plainclothes detectives, who had been waiting in the hall with Marcus, entered the room. "Doctor!" "Alistair Finch," the lead detective said, his voice booming in the quiet room. "You're under arrest?" Finch stared in disbelief as they approached. "On what grounds? This is slander. This is—" "We have a warrant to search your office and your home," the detective cut him off. "And we have a sworn statement from a pharmacist you've been using, admitting to supplying you with unlabeled sedatives for cash for the last 2 years. He decided to cooperate this morning." Oidi, the color drained from Finch's face. He had been so focused on discrediting Alara, he never imagined his own network would betray him. His carefully constructed world collapsed in an instant. As the detectives led a sputtering, defeated Finch away in handcuffs, Arthur looked at the monitor. Lily was watching the screen, her expression unreadable. Then she picked up the stylus one last time. She erased the dark, nightmarish drawing and sketched something new. 2 stick figures, a tall one and a shorter one, holding hands with a little girl in the middle. Over their heads she drew a big, bright, shining sun. Vindication was complete. A moment later, the library doors opened and Alara stepped inside. She had been waiting, watching from another room. Her eyes met Arthur's across the library, and in that shared gaze a silent promise was made. He walked to her, and for the first time took her hand. Together they went to the next room to bring their daughter home. 1 year later, the Davenport mansion was unrecognizable. The heavy curtains had been replaced with light, airy linen that allowed sunlight to flood the rooms. The sterile silence was gone, replaced by the sound of Lily's laughter echoing down the hallways, the soft notes of Alara playing the piano, and the low, happy murmur of conversation. The house was no longer a museum of grief, but a vibrant, living home. The transformation in Lily was nothing short of miraculous. With the sedatives gone and surrounded by the patient, loving care of Alara and her father, she had blossomed. She was now speaking in full, complex sentences, her mind sharp and inquisitive. She was attending a specialized school for gifted children where she excelled, particularly in art and music. The diagnosis of severe autism had been officially expunged from her record, replaced with a diagnosis of PTSD and systemic poisoning, a testament to the trauma she had endured and overcome. The wooden horse still sat on her nightstand, but it was no longer a shield. It was a memento, a reminder of a silent world she had left behind. Dr. Finch had been utterly defeated. Faced with the pharmacist's testimony, the irrefutable financial evidence of his embezzlement from the trust, and Lily's powerful statement, he had accepted a plea bargain to avoid a public trial. He was sentenced to 20 years in prison for fraud, child endangerment, and multiple counts of practicing medicine with criminal negligence. His name and reputation were destroyed. The stolen money was recovered from the trust, which was now under the joint control of Arthur and a new court-appointed guardian, with Lily as the sole, undisputed beneficiary. Mrs. Gable, disgraced by her role in the deception, had been dismissed on the day of Finch's arrest and had quietly retired into obscurity. The true resolution, however, was not in the legal victories, but in the quiet moments that now defined their lives. It was in the way Arthur now left the office at 5 o'clock every day to be home for dinner, his phone turned off, his attention solely on the two people who mattered most. It was in the easy, affectionate way Alara moved through the house, no longer an employee but the undeniable heart of their family. Her relationship with Arthur had evolved naturally from a partnership born of crisis into a deep, abiding love built on mutual respect and shared devotion to Lily. They were a family forged not by blood, but by a shared journey from darkness into light. The epilogue of their struggle was written on a bright autumn evening. Arthur had used a portion of the recovered funds to establish the Lily Foundation, a non-profit dedicated to advocating for children misdiagnosed with developmental disorders. Tonight was their inaugural fundraising gala, held in a grand ballroom overlooking the city. Arthur stood at the podium, a man completely changed from the cold, grieving figure of a year ago. He was relaxed, smiling, his eyes filled with warmth. "A year ago," he began, his voice clear and strong, "I was a father who had accepted silence. I was told my daughter was gone, locked away where no one could reach her. I was told to manage my expectations, to accept the unacceptable. I was wrong." He paused, his gaze finding Alara and Lily in the front row. Alara looked radiant in a deep blue gown, her hand resting on Lily's shoulder. Lily, in a sparkling dress, beamed at her father, her face a picture of pure joy. "I was wrong because I listened to the diagnosis instead of listening to my daughter," Arthur continued. "The real experts, the real heroes, are not always the ones with the most degrees or the grandest titles. Sometimes they are the quiet observers, the ones with the patience to listen to silence, the ones who refuse to give up hope. One of those heroes is here tonight." He looked directly at Alara, his love and gratitude shining in his eyes. "Alara Vance taught me that a home is not built of marble and stone, but of trust and understanding. And she, and my incredible, resilient daughter Lily, taught me that a family is not defined by loss, but by the love that rises from the ashes." He stepped away from the podium and walked to them, taking Alara's hand in one and Lily's in the other. He led them onto the stage, and the ballroom erupted in a standing ovation. As the applause washed over them, Arthur leaned down and whispered to Lily, "I love you." Lily squeezed his hand, looked up at him with her bright, clear eyes, and said, "I love you too, Daddy." The silence was finally, truly, and forever gone. Their new life, a life of light and laughter and love, was just beginning, a testament to the fact that the most profound truths are often spoken without a single word, and that a family is simply a place where everyone is finally heard. Before we go, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like the video. Oh, and don't forget to comment below where you're watching us from. We love to know that.